Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. So we have our three amazing panelists who Deborah will be introducing. And then I wanted to give the panelists a little bit of context about the students that are joining us. So we have students from the Student Alumni Board, from the Student Philanthropy and Engagement Center, from ASUU, and the MUS Board joining us today. So there are various student organizations throughout campus, and we are hosting this panel in conjunction with You Giving Day. So it will be rebroadcast at 8 p.m. on February 23rd, which is the Tuesday of Giving Day. And we're hoping that we will be able to give more students the opportunity at that time to learn about your careers and your experiences at the U. We will have Deborah, who is currently a presidential intern in President Watkins' office, read your bios, and then we will start asking questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So we have here with us Ché Arguello, and Ché is a prosecutor in the Utah Attorney General's office. He joined the AG's office in 2010, first serving as a line prosecutor in the Mortgage and Financial Fraud Unit. In 2012, Ché was promoted to section director of that unit. In 2014, Ché was appointed division director of the White Collar and Commercial Enforcement Division, where he served until February of 2019. After a brief stint as a division administrator at the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office, Ché has returned to the AG's office and is currently serving in the Justice Division handling the first-degree felony case reviews pursuant to HB 281 from the 2019 General Legislative Session. Ché is a 2000 graduate of the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law at Yeshiva University in New York City. Prior to joining the AG's office in 2010, Ché served for 10 years as a prosecutor in the New York County District Attorney's Office, focusing on domestic violence, sex crimes, gang, and homicide prosecutions. Ché was born and raised in Salt Lake City and received a BA in Spanish from the University of Utah in 1995. And with us today, we also have Igor Limansky. As a first-generation American and son of an Egyptian mother and a French father, Igor's work has been personally motivated to celebrate cultural diversity and build community connections through the power of our shared human experience. His work is based on traditional community organizing techniques of personal narrative and research on how to talk to people about some of the most divisive issues through deep canvassing. As a meditation practitioner with 15+ years of experience, his work focuses on the intersection of mindful contemplation and community action. And then lastly, but not least, we have with us Lianna Kinard. Lianna joined Buckner in 2016 as Vice President of Marketing. In her role, she manages the firm's brand communications and marketing strategy for 7 offices. She was recently recognized as Utah Business Magazine's Women of the Year and has also been named by Insurance Business Magazine as an elite woman in insurance. Lianna earned the BA in marketing from the Davis Eccles School of Business and will be graduating with her master's degree in general management from Harvard University this May. Lianna currently serves on the board for Hale Center Theater and Utah Polynesian Professionals. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the questions that we got from our students. And the panelists can just jump in and answer and add on to anything. So we have, what experiences did you have at the U that pointed you towards your eventual career?
Well, if you'd like, I can start with that one.
Yes, go ahead.
I really think that the experience that really kind of directed me, indirectly directed me to my career was the work and the studying that I did through what was at the time referred to as the International Center. I don't know if it has the same name as it did, but the International Center at the time was run in part by Laura Snow, who's now, I believe, with President Watkins, and has been with the university for a long time. And it was an opportunity for me, being born and raised in Utah, to get out. You know, I think Igor probably can understand what I'm talking about in terms of the work that he does, but I felt stifled being born and raised in Utah and being a little bit different for a variety of reasons from other people that were born and raised here. I needed to see the world. I wanted to travel. I wanted to experience new things, new people, new languages. And the way that I did that was with the support of the International Center and Laura Snow at the university. I was able to travel and study abroad. I was in Spain, traveling and studying. I was in Mexico twice, traveling and studying, and then ultimately got my first job out of college, working as an intern in an American consulate in Bilbao, Spain. And that eventually sort of led me down the road to wanting to study outside of Utah for my law degree, and eventually into the career of a prosecutor. But that's really what sparked that interest, was to get out, see the world, meet new people. And again, I really owe Laura and the university and the International Center all the credit for that, because that really was the beginning of everything for me.
I can go. I think, Ché, you had a question in the box, but I'll sneak in real quick and then you can read that. I think when I was going to school, I was working full-time and going to school full-time. So now that I'm older and somewhat wiser, I think if I were a student, there are two things that I would do immensely different if I could go back and turn back time, things that I look back at now. And the first would have a better relationship with my professors. I think sometimes you go to class, you sit there, you learn, you leave, you take a test. These professors that are hired with the university are some of the brightest and most experienced people in your field. One of the examples is when I graduated, I did my undergrad at the David Eccles School of Business at the U, and I was working on a marketing campaign. And I remember my first career outside of the U, I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I know what I'm doing. And so guess where I went? I called my professor a year after graduation. I sent him an email and I said, hey, you went over this in class. It's been a year. I'm a little rusty. Can I take you to lunch? And so luckily this advertising professor met me a year after graduation, and I learned so much more. And I'm like, man, I wish I would have cultivated this while I was in school. But he helped me do one of the best campaigns. It made almost $8 million, and I was fresh out of school. So the first thing would be really get to know your professors and their background, because I think they're a huge network of opportunity. The second thing is classmates. It wasn't until I went to Harvard that I realized that network is so powerful and so strong. Now, again, I was at a different time. I was early 20s, trying to work, so I didn't have school debt. I was in class, out of class. I look back now and I only know about 3 people in my program that I still keep in contact with. And you just never know the students you're in class with, what they will become and what they will be and how strong that can be. So I think I don't know if I answered that question correctly. I kind of detoured a little bit, but I think the experiences, I always knew I wanted to do marketing, but I wish I would have marketed myself better in relationships and networking while I was there.
Ché, do you want to answer your follow-up question, or do you want me to go? Okay, I'm going to take that as you saying that you want me to go.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute myself. I apologize. You'd think I'd be good at this by now, but apparently I'm not. So you go ahead.
I understood the hand movement, so we're all right. So the first experience that really jumps out for me was a class I took with Donald Raval, who was a poetry teacher at the time, and he was teaching beatnik literature. And he had a class where he would just come in, we'd read poetry, he'd tell stories about his relationship to the poems and to the poets, and the entire class was graded on one paper. And when we asked how, what's the requirements for the paper, how are you going to grade it? And he said, this paper will be graded on sincerity alone. That was it. And it was the hardest paper I ever worked for. And it completely shifted the way I thought of achievement and the way I thought of getting good grades. Because in that context, sincerity was something that I had to go internally to reference for myself and figure out, how do I convey something that means a lot to me, and how do I share that, you know, with a professor who also means a lot to me. To what Lianna said as well, he was a professor who, while he was a little aloof, he was always willing to spend some time with you. And so he would always run right after class and go straight to the bus stop. And if I could keep up with him, I could have a conversation with him. And then over time, he would walk a little slower, and we created a good relationship, and would actually, you know, sometimes walk the whole way back to where he was staying. And so the importance of finding people who are really sharing and embodying the thing that you want to be at the university is tremendously valuable. And there are so many incredible professors there who've spent their life dedicated to learning something, and learning something really well. And if that thing speaks to you, if there's a spark when you meet someone, you know, don't be afraid to maybe, you know, ask them to go for a walk, go to lunch, and really figure out what is it about them that you really admire, that you really want to cultivate yourself.
Should I go ahead and answer that question that was in the chat real quick?
Yeah, do you mind if I read it really quick?
That would be great, thank you.
Yeah, so I have a question for Ché, and it is, how did you confront your biases when starting out in your career? It appears you are very passionate about having an international perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. We all have biases, and it's funny. I think until we're taken out of our comfort zone and placed in an environment or a circumstance where we're uncomfortable, do we really begin to understand what those biases are. And certainly living abroad and then New York City did that for me. Again, sort of getting back to the reason why I left in the first place. I mean, I love Utah. I love Salt Lake. I mean, obviously I've returned here to raise my family here for a variety of reasons. But again, I grew up here sort of feeling the other side of bias, feeling like I was picked on for a variety of reasons. I was, although I'm white, I'm Hispanic. I have a Hispanic name, and that makes you different. I like to think that Utah and Salt Lake, as a progressive city that it is, has changed a lot since the time I was a kid. But I felt that I was different. I was not of the predominant religious persuasion or political persuasion. My father was not from here. I felt different, and I needed to experience getting out. So I got out. And again, being in environments where I was different for different reasons was an experience for me. And again, a lot of our biases we're aware of, and many of them were not. I remember being in DC for a year before I went to law school. I was working at a nonprofit there. And I remember being on the metro, which I thought was the biggest thing in the world until I went to the subway in New York City, and realizing I was the only white person on the train. And that was an experience for me, and what that felt like. And it was exhilaration in many ways. Like, wow, I mean, this is amazing. Like, I am really different here. I thought I was different in Utah, but look, I'm really different here, but I'm different in different ways. And again, it was really powerful. And I think ultimately getting involved in prosecution and being Hispanic and understanding sort of all of the things we're beginning to learn about the biases and prejudice that exist in the criminal justice system, over the last 21 years, it's been really an eye-opener. It's been a long process. And again, I can get into more detail if you need, but again, it was very interesting. And again, some of the biases that I had, I wasn't even aware of until I was in an environment like New York City and in a position to sit in judgment of other people in terms of the nature of the work that I do, prosecution.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and go to our next question. So, how have you dealt with career setbacks?
I'll start on this one. I have been very lucky. I'm a rare, my personal life, not so much, but my professional life, I feel very lucky. I will say that when I graduated, I was already working. When I said I was going to school and working full time, I was working for Channel 7, which the University of Utah owns, PBS. And so I would walk up to campus, work, walk down campus, go to school, walk back up. And one thing that I don't think it was a setback was that there was the director above me that I reported to in marketing had been there for 15 years, and that's where she was going to stay. There was no room for advancement. And as much as I loved public television and I thought that would be my career, I ended up taking a job in restoration services. That's a very nice and fancy way to say cleanup. So I went from Channel 7 marketing, and where I've met Yanni, I met all these really cool talent that would come in and fly in and interview. And then I went to working for a fire, flood, and mold company. Now, at the time, the first 6 months, I felt like even though the pay was better, it was an advancing career, the industry was I was embarrassed to say what I did and where I worked. And what I've learned now is that sometimes you have to take a little detour to get back on the main path. And that career, that move helped me so much more. And I'm so glad I took that risk of leaving and going into a completely different industry that I had no clue about, because it taught me so much. So I don't know, I've never had like a huge setback. I've always kind of progressed, but I do think sometimes you'll end up in jobs or positions that you necessarily didn't think you would be in. But in the big picture, I think it's sometimes those setbacks that pull us back to excel faster.
I'll say I don't really know what I'm doing with my career, so it's hard to see the things that I've done as setbacks just yet. The things that have really helped me through the different jobs that I've had, I've been really fortunate to work for the United Nations in Paris, to work for both of President Obama's campaigns and in grassroots organizing with nonprofits as well, and have had a pretty varied career. And I'll say that something that's always been helpful for me is to just enjoy the people I work with and try my best to build strong relationships with them, and really value the networks of people I have. It was because of the first Obama campaign that I ended up working for the United Nations when I was in Paris, and it was a very surprising connection that, you know, was a friend of a friend of a friend that got me my first interview. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't just trusted that the friends that I made and the job that I was doing was the right one for me at the time. And so I think just being able to trust that your career does have its own intelligence and a path, and not necessarily regretting that you missed an opportunity, but being excited about the one in front of you has always really helped me.
I would say, in terms of the biggest challenges that I faced in my career, there's a couple of them. I think I knew that there would be ethical challenges in terms of doing what I do, and that, again, the nature of the work that I do, prosecutors in particular are held to, I mean, government, individuals who work in government and lawyers in particular are held to a very high ethical standard, prosecutors even a higher standard than that. And it's really tested, you know, where I am on certain ethical issues. I mean, I moved to Utah and started to work at the Attorney General's office, and shortly after I got there, a lot of what emerged in the shirtless swallow era came to light, and that was very difficult to work in that environment and see that, especially being new in that environment, but being able to stand my ground and know where my lines were in terms of my ethics, not only my personal ethics and morals, but professional ethics and morals, and they're not always the same. What may be professionally acceptable may not be personally acceptable in either of those realms, and knowing where to draw those lines. But that was a very, very difficult time. And in the course of some of the prosecutions that I've had, having to confront ethical situations, doing the right thing is not always the easy thing. And so that has been difficult. And I would say also, you know, I've been doing prosecution now for 21 years, you know, 22, if you kind of count the work that I did when I was in law school, my third year. You see some really ugly stuff. Unfortunately, there's some pretty nasty stuff that happens in our communities, and being responsible for addressing that, whether it be, again, violence, sex offenses, you know, fraud, and watching people's lives be destroyed by having all of their life savings stolen by sociopaths. it's emotionally taxing to do that year in and year out. I've been fortunate that I've had a chance to have a little bit of variety and do different things to get breaks, so that I'm not constantly exposed to one thing. But I think that was also something that's been very difficult to challenge, the emotional aspect of doing what I do for a living.
There's a couple questions in the chat. Deborah, do you want to read them?
Yeah, so we have a question from Moria for you. How do you prevent burnout in your career, especially when dealing with people who fundamentally disagree with you? Or
Yeah,
you
so
fundamentally disagree with them?
we disagree with each other, right? If anyone's familiar with the process of deep canvassing, it's a really incredible new way of canvassing. It was invented by David Fleischer from the Leadership Lab, which is an LGBT organization out in LA. And they put it together after after Prop 8 and after the loss of marriage equality in California. And they basically decided they were going to go to areas that voted against marriage equality and start having conversations with people. And there's some great New York Times articles, there's some great radio shows about it. But long story short is they found that if they could connect with people on the values that they both shared and tell stories about how those values were created, that they could actually they could bypass that initial gap around you're someone who agrees with me. And so that makes you, in our current climate, that makes you not human. And so just bridging that initial gap through stories, through chit chat, through connection, and then being able to share why your perspective on abortion or why your perspective on voter registration or transgender rights, which have all been things that they've worked on, why those are so important. It turns into a conversation between two people. And so I've tried to always try and take a step back when people disagree with me and try and identify what the value is that they really care about. And then ask them something really simple like, tell me when you first realized that value was important to you. And then you get to listen to a really human story and you get to connect with it. I'll also say that something that I find a lot is setting some ground rules for a conversation is really important. I have my own political biases, but I have noticed that when I sometimes engage people from another perspective and there aren't any ground rules, that they will essentially decide to talk the whole time and not leave any space for me to share my opinion or to reflect back to them. And so being able to say, I really want us to be able to listen to each other and share our perspectives. Can we agree that we're gonna either only talk for a few minutes or take some time to reflect? And that creates the right conditions for a conversation that can become really heated. I'll say one last thing. I grew up in a house with a lot of mental illness, and there's also a line that just needs to be drawn. And so knowing when that line needs to be drawn and when you need time to take care of yourself and you're too triggered or you're too just not able to engage in a conversation, and being able to stop and move on is a really important practice.
Thank you. And then we have a question for everyone from Sharifa. Is your organization willing to admit to mistakes and failures? And how does it adopt lessons from those failures? And Lianna, could you please start us off?
All the time, every day. We actually just had a State of the Union meeting. And again, we're in insurance. Most people think it's boring, but I tell my daughter we're the secret heroes. We protect people. And when they are in a time of need, we're there to help them. So I look at insurance so differently than most, but we've made some errors, and it's through those errors that we learn. I think the biggest thing to learn from this is to honor your mistakes and your failures. No one's perfect. I think sometimes the best things and the best inventions have come out of continually failing over and over. There are things that I've done, projects with the firm that I thought would be a huge hit, and they failed. And luckily the environment, I report to the CEO, my C-suite, they're they rather have me try and fail than not try at all. So I think what we do is one little keynote, if I could share with anyone, is we call at Buckner debriefing. So we actually had one of the F-16 pilots from September 11th come to our firm and speak about lessons in the military. And he said that the military focuses more on the debriefing than actually, their actual simulation that they went through. So he said, you'll see them take off for a flight and fly for 2 hours, but then they're in a conference room for 4, rewatching, studying. And he said, no one has ever flown the perfect mission. And so we really try to adapt that at Buckner and make it a safe place for constructive criticism. We try and take our titles out the door, and we come in and my CEO will ask someone that is not on the executive team, how do you feel and what does that make you feel like? And so I think if any of us were ever put in that position to have a voice and to speak up and to share what you've learned, because that only will make you stronger.
I'll start off by answering this question by just saying, again, emphasizing that everything I say today really is my opinion. What I say isn't, I'm not saying it on behalf of the Attorney General or any other organization that I work for. So it's important to note that at the beginning. And let me say this, that I'm in a unique position because in all 3 of the jobs that I've had since graduating from law school, I've worked for elected officials. Politics is a very, very unique, I'll call it an industry, and it's a unique profession. I am not a politician, but I've always worked for one. I think in terms of my personal practice, I believe, and I would agree with Lianna 100%, that you admit your mistakes, you don't be afraid of them. In fact, I think you go out every day accepting and knowing that you're going to make mistakes and be eager to learn from them, identify them and grow from them. I think that's where our real personal and professional growth comes from, is making mistakes, not being afraid to make mistakes, and just moving forward from them. And that's healthy. And I'm not afraid to admit when I make a mistake. I am not perfect. I make a lot of mistakes personally, professionally, in every aspect of my life. So yeah, I mean, I would say me and professionally, and I've made some doozies. You admit them, you learn from them, you own the repercussions of those mistakes, and you move forward. And again, that's painful sometimes. I think in the context of the agencies I work for, and they're all the same. None of them is unique. I think that it is more difficult to acknowledge mistakes in the same way that I, as an individual, make them, because they are elected officials and they have to run for office. And so there is, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but there are certainly strategies that elected officials choose to pursue in terms of how and when and the nature of admitting mistakes and how they acknowledge those mistakes are fixed. It's not as easy, I think, for political figures or elected officials to do that in the same way that I am. I am ethically bound as a prosecutor, as an individual, to essentially always do the right thing and pursue justice. And so, when mistakes are made, you own them. I mean, I'm legally bound whether I want to or not, but I take pleasure in that because it keeps me on a pretty straight ethical line. But again, I think my challenges are different than the challenges of elected officials in terms of how they own mistakes, if that makes any sense.
I'll probably also give a caveat that I speak for myself and not for my organization. And I'll also try and answer your question, Anna, that you wove in about NGOs and geos and the difference in this question. But I'll say that currently I work for United Way Salt Lake. United Way Salt Lake is an incredible organization that's particularly trying to close gaps when it comes to education inequality. And it's also becoming more aware that the people who fund and run the organization are folks who actually aren't having the experiences of individuals in the community, and that the need to have people who are most impacted by those systems involved in the decision-making process is essential. And so over the last few years, we've really worked to build systems that do that. So we have a fellowship program, 6-month program where we pay folks to interview people in their community and help their voices, and we're working on helping to make sure their presence is in those decision-making tables about curriculum, about distance learning, about all of those things. And I think you can't really get to that point unless you take an honest evaluation of who's in the room, the experiences they have, if anyone who is actually experiencing the thing we're talking about is in the room, and do we actually value the lived experience of someone, or do we prefer the study of poverty over someone who's actually experienced poverty? And I think we've done a good job of not only making public statements, but also reassessing our recruiting practices, our hiring practices. And it takes a lot of soul searching and introspection and willingness to have very difficult and uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's one of the challenges in the nonprofit space particularly, is that when you're not creating a product that's being bought and sold, it's a harder measure of how you're creating positive outcomes. And so you don't have that direct feedback. And I think trying to keep ourselves honest by assessing if the work that we're doing is actually changing graduation rates, or is improving third grade reading or eighth grade math scores, and how we assess the success of our program and the impact on those specific things. I feel like that's one of the hardest things that NGOs do or don't do. And then they create programs based on a funder's desire to create something instead of based on the results of the data.
Thank you. We also have a question for Lianna. What traits do you look for in your employees and team members?
This is the worst question to ask me because I'm very peculiar when I hire. I'm going to give you a story, and this will tell you how odd I am when I do hire. So just to set like a stage, I have 4 on my team. So I don't have, I mean, we're in marketing, so I don't manage like 20 attorneys. I don't manage a group that big. But I remember I had a furniture delivery at my home, and 2 of the movers, you know, I was out of college, but I knew that I had called the furniture place and I said, who is delivering my furniture? Just like to know who's coming to my house. And he told me that there were just students. There were students at work and moved for this. So I had 2 students come to my house and move my furniture. So I had gone to Costco, bought some vegetables. I'm like, they're probably hungry. The delivery at 6 o'clock at night. They probably have families. And as they set up my furniture, they were there for 2 hours because I had, you know, bedroom furniture, normal furniture. I just moved. This one kid, Bradley, said that he was trying to get into the School of Business. So obviously I was just drawn to him because I'm like, I graduated from there. So as we were talking, he told me, you know, he was having a hard time finding a job. So at the time, my team was not hiring. My team was full. And I remember sliding my business card over to him and saying, Brad, one day you're going to work for me. I don't know when, but I know you will work for me. And I gave that to him. And I said, when you are ready to make a move, you call me. And I said, give me your cell number. 7 months later, I had an opening at my team and I called Bradley, and he ended up working for me for 3 years, and we still keep in touch to this day. But when I say I hire strangely, every student that I've hired that either is in school or graduated, I have found them. I look for talent. I think, you know, everyone is somewhat capable, but I always look for that hidden gem of personality, grit. I love grit. People that are willing to roll their sleeves up and work. You know, my last time that HR forced me to like put it out on Indeed, I had, I think, over 100 resumes that were all qualified, 100 people that were qualified. And when you start going through those resumes, they all start looking the same. And so the things that I kind of paid attention is, what makes you different? What makes you different? What have you done in the community? What have you done to get back? What are your passions? Something that makes you stand out and makes you you, because you are so different and so unique. And so to me, that is kind of what, like I said, usually I find them and I'm like, oh, when I have an opening, I'm going to find you. And that's what I've done for my entire staff right now. All of them have never applied. I went in and found them. But that's not like everybody else. It's very unique. But I would just say, I know you guys are probably working and going to school, but make sure in that time, get involved with the community, volunteer, do things that are passionate to you to give back. Because I think that's, for me, what I look at.
Thank you. That's great advice. And we also have a question for Ché. What was the most surprising challenge you've encountered since entering public service? Is it fulfilling as fulfilling as you anticipated?
I would. I mean, there's been so many challenges. It's hard to pick one out. I mean, again, I think referring back to the original one, I mean, I think the ethical challenges that I've come in contact with and the nature of the subject matter have been the most difficult challenges. It is as fulfilling. I love what I do, and it was surprising. Like, I honestly, when I came out of law school and started prosecuting, I don't think I could have said that this was going to be something that was a lifelong career. And a lot of people who came out and joined the Manhattan DA's office, where I first worked, I mean, it was a stepping stone to other bigger things. You know, Kennedy went off to do a magazine, and I mean, a lot of people just went off to do different things. But it's been more rewarding. I find it extremely, extremely rewarding. I feel like I'm able to serve the community in a very powerful way. I like the nature of the ethical boundaries. It's so nice to be able to go to work every day, and as difficult as it is, to be able to say my job is to do the right thing. And that means if someone's broken the law, then I need to hold them accountable. But I also take as much pleasure, sometimes even more pleasure, in exonerating innocent people. I mean, that's really our job too. It's not just prosecuting guilty people, it's exonerating innocent people. And so I really find it fulfilling. And I think if I didn't, I would have found something else to do a long time ago. It's a great job. It's an enormous amount of responsibility. And right now, I think the responsibility is even greater because of the microscope that law enforcement is rightfully under. And whether we're talking about the police or prosecutors that assist the police in the criminal prosecutions, we are under a microscope, and that is important. And I think that is good. I think it's good to look in the mirror. I came out of law school, again, in Manhattan, trying cases in front of juries in Manhattan, you know, at the time that the towers got hit. Cops were heroes, firemen were heroes, prosecutors were heroes. They loved us. We could do no wrong. The pendulum has swung. And again, I think rightfully so, we're re-examining our criminal justice system in a variety of ways and trying to find what is our place in it and how do we make sure that in the nature of the work that we do, the community has confidence in the work that we do. And so it's very fulfilling. It's challenging, but very fulfilling.
Thank you, Ché. And then we also have a question for Igor. What advice do you have for someone looking to pursue a career in grassroots organizing? What skills should we develop during college?
I'd say well, there's a lot of important skills. The skill that I think is really important is figuring out how to connect with people and ask them challenging questions. And so I feel like part of the conversation that we're having, particularly in a place like Utah, where you know, folks with dark hair are asked where are you from constantly, let alone people with more ethnic or racial differences. That question of how you actually engage curiosity with other people and how you actually highlight the differences that you have, but first build a common humanity and common similarity is a really important skill. The other thing that I would say is find your community. Find the people who you enjoy spending time with and organize things with them. For me, in college, that was poetry. And so I ended up organizing, it was called the Ruckus, which was a lot of fun. But it was like a live band, 3 poets and an artist. And the artists would kind of display their work, and then the poets would obviously read poetry, sometimes with a band. And you know, it was an opportunity for me to figure out what my community was interested in doing and the role that I could play in that. And I think so often there are folks who sometimes choose a volunteer project, or they choose to spend their time doing something because they think it might look good on their resume, or it might express some sort of value that they're trying to convey. I think that's important, particularly if you have if you're trying to apply for somewhere that's really going to pay attention to that. But as far as grassroots organizing skills go, there's a really different feeling when you're passionate about something, you're with a group of people who really care about it, and you're really asking the question of what is the problem we're trying to solve for, and what is the power we need to solve for that problem. And so finding a group of people you love to organize with, that you care about the same thing, and then seeing what you can create together is my advice to how to spend time in college.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the great questions. To kind of give a wrap-up question, what is one piece of advice that you'd give to our students based on what you learned and what your challenges were? What is one thing you would tell our students?
Never, never give up. I think the world can be a crazy place. And I think too, how everything, I mean, back in my day, and the other two can contribute to this, like you would actually get an in-person interview and you would get to like go and drop it off. And now everything is, you know, data analytics and if your words match to get through. And I think just never give up, and you will have setbacks and things will be challenging and you might go down a road. And I will speak to this. You'll think you'll never graduate school, especially if there are any freshmen in on this call. School will be forever, and where am I going and what am I doing? But I believe that all of you should read the book Atomic Habits. And in that book, he talks about 1%, that if you could just do 1% better and that you're constantly going 1% more towards your goal, you'll be surprised at how you'll get there. So never give up.
Go ahead, Ché.
Mine is similar. I would simply say, again, be fearless. I always, and I try to teach my kids this as well. I guess is something that I've just learned is it's okay to be afraid. I mean, understand what being brave really is. Being brave isn't the absence of fear. Being brave is being able to act in the face of fear. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to do something different. It's okay to feel uncomfortable, to step out of your comfort zone. But be brave, confront that fear, and you will surprise yourself in terms of what you are able to achieve. It is night and day for me to be, a kid growing up in Utah to spending nearly 99% of my professional career when I first came out of law school in Harlem. I mean, that is literally going at opposite ends of the spectrum, and knowing that I could do it and being able to ingratiate myself with that kind of community and fall in love with such an amazing place like Harlem and feel that that's home. Like, it's amazing what you can do if you challenge your boundaries, push your boundaries, be fearless, be fearless.
I was going to say, don't let people convince you that college is about your grades. I think college is as much about, having all-nighters with your friends or on a date and then trying to figure out how you're going to pass, your exam the next day. It's about figuring out how to balance your life and your career and your academics and your passions, and that there is such a rich environment in the college atmosphere where you get to really engage in all of those things. And the struggle of, making sure you do well in school and making sure that you have the close connections to people who you want to be close to, all of those are just part of the whole college experience, and they all are equally valuable. And so don't get too focused on the mindset that, it's all about just one aspect of the college experience. I'd say it's about all of it, and take the time to really enjoy the full gamut of experiences.
Do any of our panelists have any additional comments or anything else they'd like to say? All right, thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Hannah so we can just thank you, all of you again.
Yes, thank you so much, Lianna, Igor, and Ché for joining us today, and thank you to all the students who are able to come and join us on this panel.